Welcome to the All of Christ for All of Life podcast, where we equip men and women to be faithful in every aspect of life. This week, you will hear a writer's roundtable at a wordsmithy from the past with Alan Jacobs, Douglas Wilson, N.D. Wilson, and Aaron Rench. Before we get started, I wanted to make sure you knew that we have just released the Canon app. The app is home to every digital piece of content that Canon Press does. That means conferences, Man Rampant, lectures, and more. In fact, this podcast, the All of Christ podcast, was originally made so that people could be more familiar with the range, the breadth, and the depth of audio content that is on our store. And this app really came from that same desire. So if you enjoy this podcast and all of the topics that come with it, the Canon app is for you. Instead of hearing one of these talks and going to buy the audio, you can now go subscribe to the app and you get all of that content at your fingertips for a low monthly rate. As you know, it is also No Quarter November, which means for 1 month, you get a free subscription to the app. You can find the app in your app store of choice. Cheers.
All right, so basically what we're going to do today is a writer's roundtable without the roundtable. We're going to, basically, this is mainly going to be a time for, we'll start off with some introductory remarks from each of the writers here, and then hopefully give a lot of time to you all to ask them questions. So you can be thinking about that. Love to give a lot of time to that. So, get your questions ready. We're talking about writers. We're talking about writing. We're talking about aspiring to writing, that kind of thing. So, I think the best way to kind of go about this is start maybe with a story from each of our panelists here. Just your personal journey into writing, however that happened, however that occurred. If it was something you knew from the very, very beginning, publishing breaks, that kind of a thing. Without really much more to say at this point, I'll go ahead and we can just kind of go down this way. So Doug, if you want to start off, tell us kind of, and you can feel free to add anything into that.
Well, I'll just begin very briefly. Say I grew up in a family that loved books. My dad ran a Christian bookstore. I remember being taken down to the bookstore as a little kid whenever he had to do inventory, and we would help him count all the books for inventory, and then we'd be paid in books. You pick whatever you wanted to do. We were read to from as long as I can remember. We were read to a lot. I grew up around them, and I knew sometime in late elementary school, I don't know what year it was or exactly how old I was, but late elementary school probably, remembering that what I wanted to do was make books. And I didn't think of it in terms of writing. I just wanted to make books because the books were the coolest thing. So that's where it started. I knew so I've always known that I loved writing, wanted to write, do something with words, but I didn't actually write my first book until I was maybe almost 40. So it took a while.
Maybe just a couple follow-up questions for me and before we move on. But you were writing before then, though, right?
Yes. I did a newspaper column and some evangelistic materials and some for like Christian evangelistic papers for distributing on campus and things like that. But I didn't begin. In fact, I started writing for the Daily News in 1980, a newspaper column, and that's where I learned to type. Because the newspaper had a computer and with keyboards, and I would go down to the newspaper and log on and type in. That's how I learned to type. So
That just made me think of that Steve Martin line. He says, "Apple Pie Hubbub was a significant novel for me because when I first started using verbs." And that was when I learned to type. A bit of a chasm there, but before we move on, what maybe some this is always a tricky subject, but advice on to people aspiring to write, get published.
yeah, I would say the main thing is Mark Twain defined a classic as a book that everyone wants to have read, but nobody wants to read. And oftentimes people want to be a writer, they want to have written, but they don't want to write. And so the first thing I would do is encourage people who want to write to not start with the book deal, but if I got a lucrative book deal, then I would certainly apply myself and write something. I think you have to spend a lot of time just churning it out, learning what you're doing. That's what, and in fact, go to school, finish school. A good school will teach you will hone a lot of those crafts and make you write.
And Finnish schools are very difficult to do.
Finish school, not finishing school.
Finnish as an ethnic.
Along with Estonian school.
Charm school. Okay, well, let's move on to Dr. Jacobs. I'm gonna make you talk a little longer.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm gonna try.
Yeah, that's right.
That reminds me of a Coolidge story. A lady sat down to the president. She was seated next to him, and she said, "Mr. President," he was noted for his taciturn ways. She said, "Mr. President, I bet someone that I could get more than 2 words out of you this evening." And he said, "You lose."
1-2.
So we'll see how this goes.
Well, I think I can get more than 2 words. That's more, right? That's enough, right? I did a lot of writing throughout. Actually, until I was about 10 or 11, I thought I wanted to be an artist, and I actually tried to enroll in the famous artists school, which you used to be in like the back of comic books. You could, send it, but I was told I was too young.
They're advertising
In comic books, they tell you you're too young. So while I was waiting for my opportunity to become a famous artist, I thought I would write instead. And but I didn't feel, this is an actual connection to Doug's story, I didn't feel like it was actual writing unless it was typed. That was when you really went to the next level. That's when you were serious. And so when I got my first job, which was in a bookstore, it took me a while to get a paycheck because we were opening this bookstore in a mall, and so I worked for the bookstore for a month before we actually opened, just setting everything up, carrying the books around. It was manual labor, which I really didn't sign up for, but that's what it ended up being for about a month. And so I couldn't buy any books because we didn't have any cash registers. So I just kept setting them aside, the ones that I was going to buy, and then I discovered that the number of books I'd set aside exceeded my paycheck for the first month. So when I eventually got paid, I got a typewriter, and I wanted a really serious typewriter, so it had to be a big electric typewriter back in the day, right? And you actually had electric typewriters, and
this current spoiled generation.
And but I could only afford this ancient IBM Selectric, which I think I looked it up the other day. I think it's like a 1953 model, and I got it from this old typewriter shop, the sort of thing that doesn't exist anymore, and it had to have weighed 60 pounds, and I got it home, and I decided to rearrange my room in order to facilitate writing and facilitate other things as well. So I ended up, I set up what I thought was this great system because there was a desk that had been downstairs that nobody was using, and so I got this desk upstairs, and I lined things up really neatly. I thought it was great. I had my bed, and the bed was kind of up against the wall, and then I had my desk right next to my bed. And so the bed goes this way, the desk goes this way. And I put my typewriter in the middle of my desk, and then I had my TV. I had a little portable TV, which I put at the end because then I could just lie down in bed and watch the TV. It was just perfect, you know, it was just sitting right there. So I thought that was great. So I sit down and I roll the paper into the typewriter and I start typing. I was 16. And I start typing and I hit the return and it goes through the back of the TV. This thing was just wham! Smashed right through the back of the TV.
It was just a Neil Postman moment.
So it turned out I got a lot more writing done than I really thought that I would, because there really wasn't anything else to do in the room except write. So nobody was going to be getting me a new TV anytime soon. I didn't have any money because I'd spent it all on books and a typewriter. So you know that's how a writer begins, right? But I ended up becoming a scholar. And also, like Doug, it was a while. I mean, I was 38 when my first book came out. I had written a lot before that, but I hadn't published all that much. And the reason for it is really pretty simple, is that I loved being a scholar, but I hated the way scholars write. Just this abysmal prose. And when did it become a vice to write vividly, to write artfully? For heaven's sake, about literature and ideas. I mean, aren't those things that are worthy of beautiful writing, or at least the most beautiful writing that you can achieve? And I actually spent many years working relatively fruitlessly because I just didn't want to write like an English professor, and yet I was an English professor. You see my problem. And it was, but what I had to do was to find a way to write about the subjects of my interest and the subjects of my profession in as artful a way as I could possibly manage. And so it took me some years to figure that out. But it got faster for me when I began to follow a particular principle. And this is a principle this is my advice to writers, my one piece of advice to writers. It's the same advice that financial consultants give to people who want to save money. And the advice is pay yourself first. Right? That's what the financial consultants say. Pay yourself first. If you say, I'm going to put some money away after I've paid off all of my bills and after I've done all these other things, then you'll never actually put any money away. You really have to pay yourself first and then pay everybody else. Then you can save some money. And I finally started really making progress in my life as a writer when I started paying myself first. That is, my first and best energies went to the writing. And what I found was that if I did that, I could still be a good teacher, as good a teacher as I'm capable of being anyway, because the moment brought its own energy. The moment, the situation of teaching brings its own energy. But what I found is that if I said, I'm going to do all of my prep for class first and then I'm going to write at the end of the day, that never happened. Very little of it happened anyway. And so what I found was that if I paid myself first and I made sure that the writing got done before anything else got done, the other things got done too. And I think in many cases got done better because I felt better about myself. I had a sense of accomplishment. I had a sense that I was moving closer to the goals that I had. And so whenever I'm asked to give advice to writers, that is the one piece of advice that I always give, is to pay yourself first. That is, if the writing that you want to do is something that you're just going to fit in around the edges of your life when you can, then you probably don't really want to do it all that much. If you really, really, really want to do it, then you're going to find a way to get that done. And then the other stuff that you have to get done will also happen. But it has to be a priority. There has to be a certain degree of selfishness about making that happen. And, I maybe selfishness isn't the right word, but that's the way it's going to feel. It's going to feel like selfishness. But what it may actually be doing, what may actually be going on there is that you're heeding a call upon your life.
Discipline.
Yeah. So I think if I have one piece of advice, that's the one piece of advice. I talk long enough, Aaron? Okay.
We'll have you talk more.
Oh, I'm not done? I'm
That was it. My turn?
Nate.
Also, upper elementary school for me was when it dawned on me this is what I was going to do, though, because of generational advance. I knew that it would mean writing books. Making books. But it is, yeah, it was right in 6th grade. That was not when I decided, that was when I realized. It was sort of, this is just kind of the thing I want to do. And I didn't find out till much later that my sisters doubted me the entire time. They never told me.
You should write about it.
Yeah.
You should write about it.
I should write about it. So yeah,
some sort of delayed trauma. Or
yeah. No, actually, it kind of surprised me. They just said, "Hey, that's funny. We never thought you'd do that." But it is funny because there was no typewriters, nothing like that. But the ubiquitousness of the computer was had not yet fully arrived. So I did actually have to go right after Anselm House was all closed down and dark, because I didn't own a computer, I didn't own a typewriter. So you would never buy a typewriter, but you couldn't afford to buy the basic laptop or anything like that. So I was freshly married, right out of grad school, had finished school, and had worked on short stuff, micro prose, sketches, that kind of thing, trying to discipline paragraphs, sentences, before I actually tried to tackle anything novel length. And then got married, moved back here, starting to teach part-time at NSA, and had no money, and we had a little, brand new baby. So we would go down to Anselm House at night, I'd let ourselves in, my wife would come with me and stick the baby in the swing, and I would just sort of write until I had 3,000 words, and that was it. And so I couldn't leave until there were 3,000 words in the doc. And I didn't realize at the time that was an insanely high amount to be expecting myself to be producing, but it worked. And so it was the same kind of thing happened to me in 8th grade when I hit 6 feet and people started asking me if I could dunk. I started thinking that was a reasonable expectation. It was completely unreasonable, but they made me feel guilty for not being able to as a junior high student. So I had a real high expectation for how many words I had to be producing per day in order to do this. I wrote a short novel and wrote it very, very quickly and then threw it away. Sort of looked at it and threw it away and made a note of everything I didn't like about it, and then went to the next one and started. And that one, bizarrely, that one was 100 cupboards. So the first permutation of it. So the actual published version of 100 cupboards is a 6th draft, if you count that one. But it was this 170,000 word monster, bloated nonsense that I generated in that second attempt. And then rather than working on it through a number of weird circumstances, that manuscript was submitted to publishers before I'd read it. So I was working with a guy, not Aaron, and through various miscommunications, a rough draft, which I had not yet read, got sent out to New York. And I was frustrated. Because you can't really call them and apologize. It doesn't work. But I started getting back really nice, long rejection letters. So instead of, this will not fit in our list at this time, there were these 2.5 pages and 1.5 pages, and guys never actually saying no, but explaining to me their concerns. And that was very, very encouraging, actually. And then rather than starting over on this 170,000 word monster, I decided to write a short, tight book to counteract it. So these people are already making semi-happy, semi-negative noises about 100 cupboards in behemoth form. And I figured if I give them a tight, short thing, then they maybe will be convinced that I can discipline this. It's like this big, ugly thing. So at that point, I was talking Aaron into quitting his job. We met at NSA. We were both at NSA together, and I was talking him into becoming an agent and said, I will fire mine. Part ways with mine is a nicer way to put it. Part ways with mine and go with you if you do this. And so I gave him the first 3 chapters of Lee Pike Ridge, which was my short disciplined one. he submitted that out to the people who had the fat 100 cupboards version, and immediately started hearing back from people wanting the whole manuscript, which I hadn't written. And
Notes to writers. Things not to do.
you know,
How to
actually,
create
as
incentives.
advice,
Exactly.
how to create massive incentive and punishing deadlines. It's, you know, I with my editor now, we refer to deadlines and drop deadlines.
Yeah.
And there are deadlines and then there's real deadlines. So this became a real deadline. It mattered, and Aaron and I were both poor and unable to do things correctly, and people didn't know that he wasn't in New York, and luckily we have a 208 area code, and New York's 212, and so they think that maybe you're in Jersey or something. It works. It really does.
The
It's
iPhone
remarkable.
has totally messed it up.
Yeah, it actually has. Yeah, but it was helpful at the time. So Aaron told me he was visiting family in Philly. He could drive into New York. We had a deadline. It was 2 weeks later, I believe it was. Like, he will be in New York in 2 weeks, and if you have the manuscript, then I can hand it to people in New York. And so I had 2 weeks to finish a novel. So I did. I emailed it to him the night before. He, I think I sent you installments, and which he read.
Yeah.
And then emailed him a PDF the night before he was in New York. He double parked in Manhattan, ran into a copy center, printed out copies. And
Note to writers, things not to
incidentally, we haven't stopped operating this way. So he prints it off, and then, you know, 5 minutes later, he's sitting across from the publisher of Harry Potter saying, here's the book, you know, book you've requested, and it's still kind of hot. So the real target for us was Random House. I'd really liked their comments about 100 cupboards. They cut very heavily the direction I wanted to take it. We gave them Leap Pike Ridge, and very quickly we had a multiple house situation going on and landed with a 4-book deal with Random House. So very, very happy with them and with the way that whole pinata game went. And I'm still with them and like them a lot. We're working on a new series. So, but as far as advice goes, deadlines, high expectations, and you know what Dr. Jacobs is saying about paying yourself first is very, very true, because you will realize if you have a job, or hopefully if you're a student of mine, that I provide consequences, or your boss will provide consequences for you, and you still basically you're capable of doing a lot more than you think you are. And if you are saying, well, I'm the boss of myself as a writer, so I'm going to give myself grace because I'm tired. You know, I can put this off, or I can put that off. If you do it while you have energy, you do it first. You'll find that you still have energy to not lose your job and to not flunk out of school, hopefully. And if you don't, then you need to reprioritize, reduce that word count. But honestly, if you want to write professionally, then you are one of tens of thousands of people. The last I've seen, still the most sought after profession in North America. And if you want to beat 99% of them, you just have to write something. So it really, and that's it. And you finish something, and then when you're done finishing that one, you finish the next thing. And if you get good, opportunities will present themselves, you know, as you actually work.
And the situation might not, what you did in writing something and throwing it away is actually something that many writers do throughout their careers.
Yeah.
I know Elizabeth Dewberry's a novelist who says basically I write a novel and throw it away, and then I write another novel and that gets published, and then I write another novel and that I have to throw away, and then so every other novel she writes actually ends up coming to fruition. But she can't write those
Exactly.
without writing the ones that
And you
never
wish
see the
there's,
light of
when
day.
you read something like the unpublished works of G.K. Chesterton,
Yeah.
you think, wow, this is why it's not published. There's a reason. But you see all the ideas he had that were genius that cropped up again, and he executed them better in this other thing that was published. And that's, you have to be able to you're going to have some chaff, but at the same time, the really prolific guys like Terry Pratchett, you know, I wish that every other novel wasn't published.
Right.
Because he's a complete genius, but because he's a complete genius and everything sells millions of copies no matter what, nobody says no,
Right.
Everything off as a hard drive goes into print. And I think every other one's about right.
Yeah. There's and I think it's really important to realize that there really isn't anybody for whom this is an easy game. You know, there really isn't. And I think one of the things that we can be deceived by is the kind of writing that looks as though it were effortless to produce. And and the fact that it's effortless to read almost certainly means that it wasn't effortless to produce, right? That I remember being so shocked years ago seeing a series of drafts that E.B. White had gone through for a little casual that he wrote for the New Yorker on the first moon landing. And I had read that piece anthologized somewhere, and it's just one of those perfect little E.B. White bagatelles, where every word is exactly right, and it sounds like the guy is just talking to you, and it has this perfect casual elegance, and you think that he must have just sat down and dashed that off in 5 minutes. And that piece, which is I think maybe 400 words or something like that, went through 7 complete drafts. And in fact, he went through 4 complete drafts and sent it in to the New Yorker. The next day said, "This is garbage," and basically took 2 sentences out of it and built 3 more drafts out of those 2 sentences. Had to actually call the New Yorker long distance, this is again back in the day, right, and read to them the final version over the phone. And I think, okay, so this is a guy who's willing to go to the trouble of doing 7 drafts of a 400-word casual piece, and go even more to go to the trouble after he's already sent it in to the New Yorker, which he knows is going to publish it as is, to have the standards to say, it's just not good enough, and I don't want to put my name on it, and so I've just got to start over.
Which is why he doesn't have a large canon either.
That's right.
But
that's right.
The same time now, there's a lot of people that are online blogging, and again, if you're in my freshman class, or have been, you've heard me talk about left to right writers, and you write as you think of something. You have no self-control as a writer whatsoever. I was ranting at some of the freshmen about that today, declamation, but the ability to say, no, that thought goes later, that thought flows from this thought, and to structure and rearrange is something that we groom ourselves not to do. Our journalists now are posting remotely, onto websites. It's like everything's super fast-paced, no revision, no reworking. We'll correct it later because it's not actually in print; it's online. So you can go in and you can retract or improve or shift. And so I think there are a lot more people writing than there have ever been, thanks to the great wide interwebs. And I don't think a lot of them are improving because it's just you say it as it comes, and you're just practicing running your mouth.
The other, so just the bottom line of all of this that I'm hearing is that writing is hard work. It's a craft,
Sometimes.
it's a discipline. But like
limericks are just easy.
Except I never could finish that epic poem in limericks. I tried to do that.
Spencerian limericks.
I got bogged down about 300 pages in. And
This is a good time maybe to open up for some questions here. Anyone having any questions?
One question. What do you do? Why can't he just send his manuscript in?
Why can Aaron?
Oh.
Yeah, why do you need Aaron?
Why is Aaron
can't
necessary?
you just send it in?
What do you do?
Tell us what you do.
no offense.
nobody.
I want to actually answer this question. This is one of the reasons why I hate cameras for things like this. But there's a good cop, bad cop thing that can happen. First off, and a guy who submits for you can talk about the work in a way that you never can present it in a way that's a true sale, a true pitch that I could not possibly do. And even if I'm hoping it's good, and he can look at it and say, "This is really good. You should publish it." Can I say that? You're immediately deflated. And once they come to you and say, "We would like to publish this," they will act as if they're bestowing upon you a great honor, because they are. And there's a line 5,000 people long out the door wanting that great honor, and so they'll offer you, $200. And so, just why do you need a bad cop? So why do you need a guy who can objectively sell, objectively pitch, and given the industry, can receive more objective and harsh criticism about the work than they would ever give an author. So you can get real, direct, honest feedback from an editor, from a publisher, because you have an agent. And you can also, the other applies too. They can pitch hard as well. Did that help, Aaron? Did you feel justified?
Did that answer it?
Well, yeah, sure. And I just wanted to hear about your job. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, basically the main thing I've been doing for the past, it goes back quite a little ways, but I've been doing it full time for 2.5 years approximately, or something like that. And before that, probably another 3 years or something, working as a literary agent. And yeah, I mean, the basics of it are that you, as a literary agent, represent authors to publishers, and try and have a pulse on the market, and try and know editors, the right editors for the right things, which is a fun thing to do from Moscow, Idaho. I wouldn't do it anywhere else. But there's a writer, Walter Kern. He writes for The Atlantic, a number of places. He writes novels too, and lots of things. But
wrote Up in the Air.
Wrote Up in the Air. And,
Thumbsucker, all sorts of weird things.
George Clooney movie. But he said, if you want to be a writer, he said, move to New York, or the place that represents New York for you. And I kind of liked it because that's Moscow for me. So I've got probably now 10 authors that I work with in that ballpark, and I absolutely love it. And so just developing proposals with an author, sample writing, taking it to the right publisher, getting hopefully multiple publishers interested in it, and you're just it's some of it's like sales kind of work, just keeping on top of people. You have you read it? Getting I've got interest over here. Are you guys in or out? Some of it's that kind of raw sales stuff.
That's what my agent calls chasing.
Pardon?
My agent calls it chasing.
Chasing,
You're
yeah.
always chasing somebody.
Yep, that's exactly.
I should intrude something here, double advice to writers. One of the things that I do is I read wordsmithing books, and there's a whole cottage industry dedicated to that, and some of them are terrible and some of them are quite good, and there's just so I try to have as a regular theme in my reading books on writing dialogue, and books on plot structure, and books on just how to write. And in the course of doing this, and that's the first thing, I think it's be discriminating, because it's a cottage industry. There's a lot of good stuff, but it's also incestuous, because
there are a lot of desperate aspiring writers out there. It's easier if you're a failed novelist. It's easier to write a book on how to get your novel published.
Right. Basically it's a seller's. It's an easy sell, because writers are so hungry and oftentimes desperate. But so be discriminating when you're reading this. But in the course of this, I picked up a book, How to Be a Literary Agent, as one of my wordsmithing books, because, okay, that sounds interesting, so I read it. And then for some reason, out of the blue, I thought, I ought to give this to Aaron Rench.
I forgot to tell this part.
And so I did, and you just have to connect the right book to the right person.
Yeah, the funny thing is, when he gave me that book, I was like, what the heck is a literary agent? and who needs one of those? So I wasn't really pitching myself very well. But yeah, no, that's exactly what happened. He gave me this. I still have it on my shelf, and I don't even think I finished it, actually. But
he took his advice quickly.
It did the trick.
I think it's interesting how many writers are kind of instinctively suspicious of agents, and
should be.
And some, he's speaking from experience, obviously. But I think there is this there are reasons for it. There are
Yeah.
reasons for it, for the suspicion. But there are also some bad reasons. And I think it's the best thing that has ever happened to me as a writer is getting the agent that I have now. By far the best thing. Now, getting a bad agent can maybe be the worst thing that would ever happen to you as a writer, but having a good agent, because if you have a good agent, then what you get to think about is writing. That's just terrific, because so many other things that you would have to deal with if you were trying to do everything on your own, that's their job. It's not your job. Your job is to write. And it's been tremendously helpful. And agents know a lot of stuff. A good agent knows a lot of stuff about the market, about what, so you could send your manuscript out to 30 different publishers. An agent who actually knows the territory would realize that in 27 of those cases, you're absolutely wasting your time. There's no way that you're ever going to get a response from that house or from that editor. And a knowledgeable agent would be able to say, instead of sending this to these 30 random places, how about these 6 targeted places where I can be pretty confident that your work is going to get at least a sympathetic hearing. And you heard from Nate how important it can be to get a sympathetic hearing, even when they're not saying yes. That can really be the strength to go on in so many ways, and in addition to substantive advice that might come. So I just think that it's hard work finding the right agent, but it's worth pursuing. I think it was for me anyway. There's a hand over here.
We'll go here and then we'll go.
Okay.
Mr. Rench, how did you get into writing?
Well, I don't write as much as these guys do. Basically, I got into, it's a very easy story. I got into writing because...
I gave him a book.
No,
How to be a writer.
pardon me.
I know you write poetry.
Yeah, and the way I got into that was I took a poetry class from Doug Wilson.
Partly responsible. Who immediately handed you an ancient book.
So why don't you try this? But that really was. I'm not like these guys. I wasn't thinking about. I was always interested in books and devoured things like Hardy Boys. That's and loved to. Well, not love, but I didn't mind a day sick because I could plow through 3 Hardy Boys or something like that. And then sports kind of pushed things out in junior high and high school, and I didn't read that much. But I wasn't like sitting around. Not sitting around, but in elementary saying, I'm going to be a writer. And it was, but I always did love words. I always did love reading and books. And my dad always had a huge library. So I was always around books. And then came to New St. Andrews and took this poetry class. And it was, I always say it's kind of like the entomologist who, and I have one in mind, who picks up a turtle or something like that and can, talk about all these. You just think turtle, but they pick it up and they identify all these really cool things about the turtle, and that's kind of what poetry felt like. You picked it up and it was like all of this complexity and beauty, and it really just got me hooked. And so that class was kind of the launching pad, and then I just kept going with it. And then I took another poetry class later on from Robert Wrigley, a poet over here at UI, who's a pretty well-known poet. And that class took it another step, and then later on, I'm trying to remember exactly how that happened. I think that's right. I had actually started looking at MFA programs, and funny enough, I had looked at Oxford before, and I didn't really think much about it. And then a couple years later, Nate said, Oxford's got this poetry MFA program. And I found out, and so he told me about it. I was actually at my in-laws on Christmas vacation, filled out the application, and had like 2.5 weeks to get my reference letter and all this stuff. And anyways, applied, and 5 months later found out I was accepted. And so then I went and did that. And it's just, that's kind of the brief the brief story. on that.
But he also has sort of an electric magic touch. I mean, with the Oxford thing, the only one there who wasn't previously published or already had a different, graduate degree. So just sort of, I think they all needed an agent. So it opened doors.
Yeah.
I guess this question is for Nate. What is the process of constructing a novel? Like, I can conceive constructing a short piece of fiction.
You can conceive of that.
A short story, a short sketch, but just when you get to novel length, how do you have to change your mentality? What do you have to do to accomplish that?
Well, I just actually started with trying to expand short fiction, which didn't work terribly well. So as soon as you're trying to go from a 3,000 to 5,000 word piece and you're trying to go to a 100,000 word piece, it is a huge explosion. And just in some way, it's like putting together a whole bunch of short pieces that are starring the same people. And each chapter does need to have its own rise and fall and tension and so on, but you're always going to marching toward this end goal. But for me, it was always, and I have a blog. I was saying this earlier when we were in an interview. I have a blog on which I do not blog, because if I have time to sit down and compose, I have things I have to finish. So.
Because of the drop deadlines.
Because of the real drop deadlines. But with the novel, what I found really helped me control it. I tested short novels. I went with the big bloated thing, and I had to really figure out how to get a handle on it. And what I have is basically a way of trying to hit your marks. Like you set a whole bunch of points for yourself, and then you actually hit them. It's like hitting deadlines. And hitting your marks is something I think that helps a lot through the editing process. It helps in the invention process. And I've been meaning to write a piece for my blog for writers on hitting your marks, and I'm not going to for probably 2 years. But what I do is basically I'll try to get a picture of what's the whole story. So where does this book begin and where does it end? Where am I going to leave these characters at the end of the story? Then in between there, what are my major events? Like what are the major plot turning events that happen, and I'll end up with maybe a 5-point outline. So for a 100,000 word novel, I'm looking at 5 points. So you've got your opening, you've got your end, and you've got maybe 3 macro points in the middle. And then you just take the first 2, it's like from the beginning to this first point, and move that off to the side, and you're thinking, okay, how much time is this going to take? How large is this unit? Is this 3 chapters? That's 3-4 chapters maximum. Then you break that out, like, okay, so what are going to be the points that get me there? And you kind of just sub-outline it. And so now I've gotten to the place where that can be mental too. You don't have to have, if you really know it well, you can be fine. So then I'll sit down to write a chapter, and I'll take, any old scrap of paper. I'm a little more organized now, so it's usually matching, but whatever's available. And I will write a short 3 to 5 point, usually 5-point outline for that chapter. So first chapter, I have my macro thing that all fits on one page. First chapter is going to do what? And that will just go on the wall right above the computer. Like these are your marks. You're going to hit this at the beginning. This is what has to happen in the middle. And what you discover as you're writing your chapter is that you keep wandering off the path. So where are your characters going? Your readers are allegedly interested because the characters are journeying somewhere. Something's happening to them. They're growing, they're changing, there's outside tension. And you end up with them off, catching a beetle or something.
Turtle, probably.
Yeah, turtles. So it is really easy if you just say, okay, I'm going to write about this kid. What happens next? And it turns into just and then. It's like, and you're wandering, trying to find, okay, so what's interesting that could happen next? You really have to know.
Suddenly a shot rang out.
Yeah, a shot rang, a dog barked. So you really, when you sit down, you have a character which is shaped at this point. I mean, at this part of the process, I know these characters already, they're not written. But I'm not going to start until I know them. I'll know them much better once I've written them. But where are they and what am I aiming at? So you aim at something and then you hit it, and you keep at that chapter till you've hit it. That chapter ends, you get the next scrap of paper. What's chapter 2 going to do? And you always have the macro goal, how it's going to serve this overall trajectory. So you are putting together all these pieces, and then if it really works remarkably well, then everything's glorious and easy in editing. If it doesn't, then you find yourself doing that over and over, replacing sections, just deleting whole things, whole threads, and playing with it. And deadlines are beautiful because I'm now to the point where I could work just indefinitely on a novel. I don't know when I would say, okay, it is done. Like, that's done. There's not one phrase that I would change in this 100,000 word piece. That it doesn't occur. So now I've got a real hard deadline tomorrow for one, and then an immediate another deadline following October 15th. So it's everything's real rigid. That's how you know when you're done. It's October 15th. But the thing, at least for me, I work better that way because I'm able to put in intense focus and energy into something because there is a real hard thing coming. So if it was open-ended, I would always be gentler to the manuscript. And you really need to be fairly ruthless in the editing process. So the deadline I'm on right now, spitting on the table. The deadline I'm on right now is an editing deadline. It's a polish draft, and you really need to be cutthroat and quick. And if you have an instinctive impulse that this probably isn't that great, then cut it. It's like it needs to be. You really need to like every single part. You need to enjoy every single page, or you don't release it.
I think it's interesting to think about how Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings because he had no idea what was going to happen.
Yeah.
When he just kind of launched in, and there were several points at which he stopped because he didn't know what the next thing was going to be. It took him 17 years to write The Lord of the Rings. So this is what happens when you don't have marks to hit and you don't have deadlines, right?
You end up writing mythologies, not books.
Yeah.
Right.
And C.S. Lewis says somewhere that when his friends would give him critical feedback to his writing, that Tolkien responded one of two ways. Either he took no notice of you at all, or he ripped it up and started over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was just agonizing.
Yeah. Lee Pike Ridge actually for me was fairly short and manageable, but that was just, I started and I was wondering what it was going to be. And what's going to happen? There's a chunk of styrofoam. And you're starting trying to figure it out.
Oh wait, that's a turtle.
Yeah, exactly. Backspace. But it was
The delete key is your friend.
Exactly, it really is. But it was fairly fairly small. But still, as a result of the fact that it wasn't planned, like that I wrote from left to right, I finished up close to 80,000 words. I then cut it down to 49 without cutting anything. It's like, so the story was there, and you find that there's just so much dawdling while you think of the next thing, and it's like siphoning gas, where you have your characters here, and it's sort of like you need something to be flowing, so they are thinking around thinking things, they're thinking, oh, here's something. But as you come back, there's this, hey, what is this 3,000 words doing? And that was you meeting your daily quota, is what it was. While you thought of the next thing. So I've learned to try to preempt that a little bit. So I do a lot of.
Even so, though, 3,000 lousy words is something to work with, right? I mean, it's something. It
absolutely.
It beats the heck out of
Still meet
just
your
doing
quotas.
this.
You can always cut it. It's like building. You can always cut it shorter, but you can't cut it longer.
Yeah.
Get the material out. Get it.
I don't know. I always every draft comes back and it goes back larger.
Givler.
What is the average word count for a novel these days? Like that editors are looking for?
There's not an average. It really depends on your genre.
A Tom Wolfe novel or a?
The average word count of a Tom Wolfe novel. It is. It's totally up in the air. I mean, honestly, it's going to come down to does it grab and will it sell? So.
I had heard that for like starting out authors, they tend to like shorter pieces because there's less risk in that. Is that still the case?
Probably. Yeah, but it really, again,
Probably
it's
more
more
of a chance of getting a reader.
But if you're writing crime thrillers and you submit a crime thriller, it's like it's really short. Like, well, those people don't buy those books. That market is in for an escape, and that might be a problem with this genre, but they're not looking for something short. So it's going to depend on young adult, teen, adult, fantasy, sci-fi. or deep and profound. So if you're aiming for deep and profound, I'd stick it. Keep it short. Short.
Because it's tiring to write that stuff.
You're like, it's even more tiring to read it.
You like maybe bookmark language.
Saw in the back there, yeah.
Could, I guess, any of you talk about your initial inspiration for a book? Like what the idea, when the ideas come, and...
I tell people that I write to make the little voices in my head go away.
How's it working for you?
I think they enjoy being published as a book.
I was talking to Dr. Jacobs earlier about his biography of the imagination of C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis said that he wrote from images. You know, he had pictures. He had a picture of a fawn and a lamppost. And
You had to justify that.
I need to write a story around that. So Lewis starts with images. This is going to sound weird, of course, but I oftentimes start with titles. I think of a title, and I think, you know, a phrase that would be a great title of an article or a chapter, or that's the kind of thing that I want, and I say, well, that's such a great title, it needs something to go with it. And so I frequently write to the title.
I think for me, it's things that won't leave me alone.
Like the voices in my head.
Yeah. Actually, what happens is that there are voices in Doug's head, and then he calls me and tells me what they're saying. No, but I mean, there's something you think that's interesting, and then you don't think about it again. And then there are other things you think that's interesting. No, I don't think I want to do that. And then next week it's back, and then a month after that it's back. And after a while you realize that if I don't write this, it's actually not going to leave me alone. And so, I mean, most of what I write gets written that way. And I think that's something that can really apply across almost any genre that you happen to be writing in. This sense that your mind has latched on to something which is clearly of significance to your mind, even if you don't know what that significance is. And sometimes writing is how you find that out. It's how you discover what it is that your mind is working with and why it keeps being drawn back to this. And so I find that pretty helpful, because if an idea pops into my head, I've learned not to just sit down and start working on it immediately. I'll make note of it, but I won't sit down and start working on it immediately, because I don't know whether it's something that's got legs. I don't know whether it's something that's going to last. I'll wait and see whether it returns, whether it revisits, and that way I have a much better sense that what I'm working on is something that I'm going to continue to be interested in, and I'm going to want to do, and it's going to carry me through those tough times when I really don't want to be working on it.
Total agreement. So it's really, for me, it's about writing to scratch an itch.
Yeah.
So the itch can come because there's a phrase you want to justify. 100 covers was I was trying to justify a title to my wife. So, you know, late night conversation, I say 100 little covers, sounds like a fun kids book title, and I was ready to move on and be done with it. She says it sounds like a stupid title. And so then there's pressure. Come on now, this could be amazing. So
basically writing to prove your spouse wrong.
Actually, then in fact it was I considered myself to have won the argument. She was insisting the next morning that I start writing.
Yeah.
You know, so it was and for me it was still fairly theoretical, but the itch was there. Lee Pike Ridge was the first line, you know, the first line needed to be justified. But pressure, different kinds of pressures always work really well for me. So I like problems. Yeah, I like things that would be difficult. So I end up with a scenario where it's a certain type of person or a certain situation. How could you arrive at that in a story? What would get you there? Like that moment, and it could be a weird visual. So, you know, the one I'm working on right now, this will sound strange, but killing somebody with a key ring. I was like, how would that happen? And so that was early germination phase. But one of my favorite moments was I got sent a cocktail napkin by Esquire magazine, thanks to Aaron, and a weird situation there. I don't know exactly what all went into them sending me a cocktail. napkin, but they sent it to 200 writers, and they said, can you write us a story on this little paper cocktail napkin? It has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and begin the present. And those are the rules. And it was a real quick reaction to it. I was at Mark Beecham's bookstore, which then existed, and there was a big fat book up on the shelf that said, The Rise and Fall of Judaism. And I thought to myself, that would be really funny to stick that on a napkin. So like that's, and then I left, and for a month I tried to think of other things to put on a napkin. I couldn't. It's like that was it. And so I changed
It was
it.
that or nothing, right?
Yeah, it was that, exactly. So the one time I've written anything on a typewriter, I went back down to the bookstore, cut the napkin into little strips, fed it through a manual typewriter, and typed on it. The title was The Rise and Fall of Circumcision, instead of Judaism. And that was my morph off of The Rise and Fall of Judaism. Then I had to justify that. So here's my title. I typed it on the front of the napkin. Now, okay, what next? I ended up fitting 1,100 words on that cocktail napkin. But then hand stitched it up and sent it off to them. But that was
a napkin novel.
Yeah, but there's a weird pressure. So if somebody says, I bet you couldn't write a story about, fill in the blank, a fat kid with 3 arms. It's not going to be long before you're saying, well, there's potential there. Front and center.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
What do you all hope to get out of your writing? So creative writing or theological writing. So what is your, are you hoping to impact the culture in a certain way, just write good stories, give impact as Christians, hopes and goals that way for your writing?
Freud once said that the artist gives up, and of course Freud thinks in masculine terms. He says the artist gives up money, women, and prestige in order to produce his art, by which he hopes to gain money, women, and prestige.
Freud is so rarely right.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So whenever anybody talks about, that's always the first thing that comes to my mind, But I'm just quoting Freud here. I'm not, making any endorsement. It is. For me, it's always a very strange oscillation between the internal, the itches that need to be scratched, and the desire to make a difference somehow. And I when I think about it, I do think seriously about a really wonderful passage in a play by Tom Stoppard called The Real Thing, which has, you're going to bear with me here because once I start talking about this, I have to tell a story about the metaphor that a writer in this play named Henry creates. Henry has a female friend who has a boyfriend who is a recently released convict, and when he was in prison, he decided he wanted to be a writer. And she wants Henry to help him be a writer, but he doesn't have a lot of talent. He's not really very good. And Henry's trying to explain the difference between good writing and bad writing, and he picks up a cricket bat. And he says, this looks just like a piece of wood to you, he said, but the cricket bat is designed and built with this extraordinary elegance and specificity, so that if you hit the ball just right with it, it goes 400 feet in 5 seconds. It's just, it has this resilience. It's this amazing thing. He says, but you can actually carve something that looks just like it. And when you hit the cricket ball with that, instead of the ball flying 400 feet, you drop the bat and you jump around with your arms under your armpits, your hands under your armpits, because they're aching from the. He said that's the difference for him between good writing and bad writing. The good writing is like that cricket bat, that is perfectly. He then illustrates this by reading lines from the guy's story and then jumping around the room. Going, oh. But then he ends up by saying, if you do it right, he said, then you have the opportunity to nudge the world a bit and to make something that children can say after you when you're dead. And I always thought that was I really like that way of putting it. You know, that, yeah, just, no, let's don't be grandiose here, you know, but if you can nudge the world a little bit, just a little bit, you've done something really, really worthwhile, it seems to me. And then maybe there will be somebody who'll remember it a long time from now, too. That's what I always think about.
I would add to that, there's the sort of the autobiographical level. I write at that level for the same reason that dogs bark. It's just, you just do this, right?
What do they hope to get from it?
You know, you
They
just,
also are nudging
you-
the world. Treat.
That's more, you're overanalyzing it.
Sorry.
But the
Literary critic is what I do.
But at the theological level, in the beginning was the Word, anarcha and halagos. And we are Christians. We worship the Word of God. So God is Father and Son and Spirit, but God is also speaker, spoken, and hermeneutic. And the Spirit interprets the deep things of God. The Father speaks. The Son is the spoken one. And so Christians are people of the Word, and so must therefore be people of words. And I believe that the decline of the written word is a direct result of a decline of worship, not understanding our duties in worship, not understanding who we are as homo adorans, worshiping man, not homo sapiens, but we want to worship God. And I believe that a reformation or restoration of true worship is going to, not in the postmodern critical sense of logocentric, but in the robust Trinitarian Christian sense of logocentric. We are worshipers of the Word. So how could we not be all about words? How could we not love them, love the rumble bumble of them, and love the color and the texture, and say, ooh, when you do it, arrange it this way, look what happens, and when you do that, look what happens. So it's ultimately theological, but I'm not trying to throw a pious sheen over the whole enterprise, because you have to come back and say, at a personal level, you're scratching an itch. God made us to do this sort of thing. So when different people, painters and architects and artisans, are exhibiting the mannishness of man, to use Francis Schaeffer's phrase, writing is one of the essential human endeavors. And I think it's one of the coolest things in the world that Augustine, dead these centuries, could think certain thoughts in his head, scritch things on paper. I can download those same thoughts
For free on your iPhone.
I can get a book and read, and then think the same things that he was thinking. Is that cool or what? You know, and so it enables you to reach your descendants, to write for others, to give yourself away. I think the writing life in a Trinitarian context is something that needs to be written about a whole lot more, actually.
Yeah, just to pile on that, it's not about writing professionally or writing to make a living or something like that at that point, because, you know, I think more housewives ought to be writing. You know, it's you know, people who are not trying to crack in and start a career, but because they have things to discover. You know, there's pictures to cook. You know, like there's a lot of joy to be found in discovering communication. So what is that thing that you're sensing, that you're seeing, that you're experiencing in this moment, and then the attempt to capture it, like the attempt to capture it and give it to somebody else. So if you've done that, you know, that's anybody alive, anybody living has that, and then if they can grab it and give, then they're a poet suddenly. You know, that's what it is. And you know, we're not talking about needing to write 200,000 words. We're not talking about, you know, vast tomes, but just the ability to capture. Like, because God's doing it constantly around you. God's writing all the time, and there's all this wordplay swirling around us. And then we just try to snag, imitate, you know, as best we can, and then give it to somebody else. And you measure your success in capturing when you give it to somebody else. Like, do they hear that chord, you know, that you heard when they're not there? You know, so the successful communication of experience through time over generations, and not just thought and propositions, but it's it's weird. And it is kind of, writing kids' books is really, really fun because they're my favorite kinds of books. But also because I like to read them, it's the dog barking thing. But then knowing that I don't know my great-great-grandfather. I have no idea who he was. But my great-great-grandkids will know me pretty well. It's like this is, putting yourself into something and being able to, hand it off. So I've described for a lot of people that writing is like cooking for a crowd. Yeah, so you're cooking for a mob of strangers, and you're trying to find things and combine things. Then you send it out the door and see what happens. But it does last. Sometimes it doesn't last longer, but a lot of times it does.
This is maybe it won't seem related to anybody else, but it seems related to me. Anyway, there is a in a lot of these matters, one of the most beautiful and powerful things that I've ever read is an essay by Wendell Berry called "Standing by Words." And it's a really powerful thing to think about, what it means to write words that you can stand by. And to write something, whether it's for yourself or for your family or for a crowd of strangers, and to work really hard at it and to be able to look back and say, yeah, I stand by that. That's a tremendously gratifying thing to be able to do.
Which is why I never read anything once it's published.
Yeah.
I want to be able to say I stand by it.
Yeah. I stood by it when I wrote it, but don't ask me now. Yeah. But that essay by Barry is just terrific, and I highly recommend it to anyone who takes the making of words seriously.
It reminds me a little bit, I can't remember exactly how he put it, but Chesterton said something like, the poet is the one who dies and got his music out. He's the one, and he doesn't mean like poet as in I write poetry, but the person that for him the poet was kind of a symbol of all the good stuff.
Yeah.
And he's the one that got his music out, and I always liked how he put it.
For him, that could have been inventing a certain type of cheese.
Yeah, exactly.
You did your thing, and then you moved on.
You got your music out.
You got it out there.
Cheese particularly.
Cheese particularly. The poets have not said much about cheese, have they? Mysteriously.
Yeah.
This is for Nate. I was wondering if you could talk about the shift from writing novels to writing for screen. What are the differences, and if you can do one, can you discipline yourself to do the other?
Let me just, I'm sorry, this probably should be the last question. But I just wanted to interject that real quick.
Okay. So I'll just ramble on indefinitely. There's a macro difference, a large difference in that you can write the best script of the year. I mean, hands down, best script of the year, and it could be the worst movie of the year. There's so many other elements that come into play in the execution of a film. So it's like writing. You could take Henry V and go watch a bunch of fifth graders put it on, and are you moved? It doesn't work. So it's strange in that you are taking ideas and then you're handing them off to committees and teams of people and saying, you guys go ahead and execute it. And that's just very, very odd to me. So I'm not used to that at all. So I have a firm commitment to prose and fiction because it's where I can actually steer it. I'm not writing recipes. So a screenplay is a recipe for a story, which somebody else can then go execute, where a novel is you're all the way through the execution, with the exception of the title and the cover design. I mean, that's
Don't get me started.
Yeah. So, which are both considered marketing decisions, and they are. So the publisher flexes their muscles there, and they'll do what they want to do on the title and the cover. But everything on the inside is you, if you have the right kind of relationship with the publisher. But script is just a very, very different thing, and I do enjoy it. I like it, but knowing full well it requires 90 other people or 400 other people to make this story happen. So I've written a couple. I've written 2, working on the 3rd right now, which is The Great Divorce, which is the most difficult and exciting thing I've worked on. But it's great. And one of the reasons why I'm excited working there is because I think that the producer can do this. He can tackle difficult stuff. So that's macro difference. Micro difference is you are writing structure and dialogue. So if you can write a novel and you can write it well, and you are not a snot, you're willing to admit that you must structure your novel, and you cannot just let yourself free range like a really healthy chicken. So you've got to actually be disciplined. Like, you have to hit your marks. You've got to be disciplined. You have to serve your audience, not yourself. Like, you can admit those things, and you're good at dialogue, and you can shape a novel. Then yeah, you can learn to shape a screenplay. You know, like it can be done. It's structure and dialogue, and then all the flesh that gets put on it afterwards, the really terrible score and the bad special effects, those will come later.
Can you explain again how the chicken comes in? I was following it.
Yeah, until that point. Yeah, that's okay. No, I won't. I was good in the moment.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks.
We'll pass it off to